Josie, it's your new nanny, Polly.
The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, a Hulu original.
What do you know about her?
Now streaming.
You think if you try hard enough, you can stop bad things from happening, but you can't.
Good help.
Get out!
Is hard to find.
You made me do this.
A Hulu original. The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. Rated R. Now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus. For bundled subscribers. Terms apply.
It's Huluween on Disney Plus. Watch frightful family favorites like Hocus Pocus and Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas on Disney Plus.
I am the Pumpkin King.
Then take the terror to 10 with a thrilling new remake of The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Scream, and more with Huluween on Disney Plus. All these and more streaming this Halloween season with Hulu on Disney Plus. Bundle subscription required. 18 plus. Select Hulu content via Disney Plus. Additional content on Hulu app. Terms apply. Visit disneyplus.com/Hulu for details.
This is True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time. Week by week, you'll hear the true stories behind the operations that have shaped the world we live in. You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position? I'm Rhiannon Needs, and this is True Spies from SPYSCAPE Studios. May 1942. On the western edge of Berlin, a smartly dressed woman walks purposefully along a grand avenue, occasionally exchanging greetings with the uniformed men she passes.
She is blonde and blue-eyed, so she not only speaks fluent German, she looks like a typical German.
And so no one bats an eye as she peels off the street and makes her way into the embassy of Manchukuo, also known as Manchuria, a Japanese puppet state in northern China. There, she is acknowledged with a nod and ushered into a small room. As she awaits the arrival of her contact, she retrieves a key from her purse.
And the shaft of the key, you can pull the end off, and it's got a pin down the middle, and they could wind the film around that pin and put the shaft of the key back on.
The woman unspools a length of microfilm and places it on the table. Soon her contact arrives, carrying a parcel of his own.
She handed over her microfilm, and the contact at the embassy actually now gave her a massive block of notes, including a lot of American dollar notes as well, to give back to the resistance headquarters.
She looks at the man with ill-contained contempt. She had specifically requested the bills be pre-concealed for her journey back to Poland. There is no way she will be able to carry a brick of foreign currency across a fiercely guarded wartime border.
And the resistance in Poland are expecting her to get back within 24 hours. But instead of going straight back this time, she diverts. She takes a bit of a risk and goes to the apartment of an old friend in Berlin. And they stay up all night together. Her friend makes a kind of glue out of flour and water. They take the lining out of her old battered suitcase that she travels with, and they paste these dollar notes, all of these notes, into the lid of her suitcase.
The next morning, bleary-eyed, she heads to the train station, dragging her suitcase behind her, and boards a train bound for occupied Poland. She is 24 hours behind schedule.
As soon as she gets across the border into occupied Polish territory, she goes to stay with her sister Clara.
To her sister Clara, the woman will always be known by her birth name, Elzbieta. But to her comrades in the Polish resistance, she is Agent Zoe.
Zoe's actually recruited Clara into the resistance as well, and she feels very responsible for her younger sister. So when she goes to stay with her, they have a little system for security. Zoe will throw a pebble up to a side window and Clara will twitch the curtain. They'll know everything's good.
By the time Zoe arrives at her sister's apartment building in the city of Sosnowiec, it is late afternoon. As usual, she picks up a pebble and aims it for the window on the second floor.
And nothing happens, and she immediately knows that something is wrong. So instead of calling at Clara's apartment, she goes to a neighbour, and the neighbour just opened a door a crack and hissed at her, "Get out, go, they've arrested Clara, and there's Gestapo waiting for you in her apartment."
Panic seizes Zoe by the throat.
And Zoe must have had this horrendous moment of standing there, knowing that her sister has been taken, is probably even then being brutally interrogated. But there is nothing she can do for her. And it's certainly not going to help Clara if Zoe is just arrested as well. So she turns on her heel.
As quietly as she can, Zoe creeps back down the stairs and out of the building. As she drags her suitcase through the neighborhood, she must feel as though she has a target on her back. But she manages to make it to the apartment of a friend a few streets away. There, she learns that much of her resistance network has been compromised, and that the Gestapo will no doubt be hunting for her too. The next morning, she rises early.
She goes to the train station. The first thing she does is checks her very precious now battered old suitcase into the left luggage system there.
The temptation to run at this point must be overwhelming, but she forces herself to wait. The station is a commuter hub, and she gambles on the likelihood of finding a friendly face in the morning bustle.
When the first trains come in with the secretaries going to the occupying authorities' offices, she manages to hiss a warning to one and to push a note into the hand of another as she passes by. So she sets out a ripple of warnings, and that probably saved many lives.
Realizing that lingering in the station for too long is likely to draw attention, she deposits her left luggage receipt with a friendly contact in a nearby pharmacy and hastily boards a train to Krakow.
And it's only on that journey that she realises that she herself is now being followed.
Disembarking into the city streets, the man clings to her like a shadow. She spends the entire day pacing from place to place, disappearing into crowds in an effort to shake him.
Finally, she thinks that she has managed to do so, and she then decides to wait to the last minute, and she goes back to Krakow station and she takes the last train from Krakow to Warsaw. This is an express train going through the night. She climbs into a carriage, there's basically no one in there, and she settles down and relaxes.
Zoe hasn't slept for 2 nights. At long last, she thinks she might be able to get some rest.
And then the carriage door slides open and a man gets in and sits basically opposite her, and she recognises him. This is the man that's been following her. And the train starts to move.
The man greets her with a satisfied smile. The train will not stop until Warsaw, where they both know she will be arrested. The cat has caught his mouse.
And again, what is she going to do? I mean, she's absolutely terrified. I think her greatest fear is if she is arrested, that under brutal interrogation, she may not be able to withstand the pain and may betray some of her colleagues.
Faced with that outcome, Zoe knows that she would rather die. Perhaps she should find a way to end it before they reach their destination.
She doesn't want to die. Of course she doesn't. So as the night progresses, she can't sleep. She's still thinking, what can she do? She's sitting in the carriage, and then she thinks the man who's been following her has fallen asleep. So she slips off her shoes and her jacket, leaves them on the chair, and she tiptoes out of the carriage into the corridor and walks down towards where the toilets are. And she looks back and she sees his pale face lean out of the carriage door, and he's still watching. So she just presses on towards the loos, and she sees through the window, she sees telegraph poles whizzing past.
With every second that passes, Zoe is hurtling towards her fate.
This is an express train. It's not slowing down. It's not going to stop until it gets to Warsaw. So she presses on, and then she finally passes by the passenger door, and she thinks, I'll just have to do it. And she suddenly leans in, pushes the door open, and throws herself out of the moving train.
This is True Spies, the many lives of Agent Zoe.
My name's Clare Mulley, and I am an author focusing on the female experience, mainly in the Second World War.
Clare Mulley has built her formidable reputation on finding the remarkable stories that have too often been left out of the history books. Usually, that work involves tireless digging. But every so often, an undeniable story lands in your lap.
I first came across this story at the Polish embassy. After my second book, The Spy Who Loved, came out, I was honoured by the Polish government, which was absolutely fantastic. So they invited me up to an event, and there was a little old lady at the back of the room. So I just thought, I've got a minute, made a beeline for her, and nearly missed getting presented because she was so interesting. Her name was Hanna Czarnocka. And I said, excuse me, may I just ask what's brought you here today? And she said, well, I am a veteran of the Warsaw Uprising. You know, she'd served in the Second World War for Poland.
At the back of a stuffy reception room, Claire listened to Hannah's words and found herself transported to the nightmarish weeks in 1944, where Warsaw rose up against its occupiers. Hannah, then just 16 years old, had been a part of that tide of resistance. Now, 70 years later, she turned to Claire and asked what she was doing at a Polish honours ceremony.
I felt about, a centimetre high. I said, well, I just wrote a book about another war heroine whose name was Krystyna Skarbek, or Christine Granville, as she's known in this country, born Polish, ended her life British. And she said, oh yes, Krystyna, she was an amazing woman, fantastic. But why didn't you write about the real hero? Why didn't you write about Zoe? And I had to say, who's Zoe? And that was the first time I'd heard her name.
As Clare Mulley was soon to discover, that question, who is Zoe, has no single answer. Zoe was a formidable soldier of the Polish resistance, the creator of hard-won intelligence networks, a brazen, border-hopping courier, a fierce advocate for the rank and status of female fighters. She was the only woman to parachute into occupied Poland during the entire war. Like Claire before you, you are about to dive headlong into the remarkable tale of Agent Zoe, a woman destined to play her part in history, long before she ever took an alias.
So Elzbieta Zawacka was born in 1909 in a beautiful medieval city in northwestern Poland called Toruń. And when she was born in 1909, that historic Polish city was actually within the borders of the land that had been annexed into the Prussian Empire. And the Prussians were very keen to get rid of any Polish language, culture, tradition and heritage. And so she and her family were forced to speak German. Her first language was actually German.
Elzbieta and her family were forced to keep their Polish identity and pride a well-concealed secret.
Her name at home was Elzbieta, which is the Polish form of Elizabeth. But in public, she was called Lisa or Liesel, the German version of Elizabeth. What the Germans didn't realise they're doing, where they were training up a perfect agent, because here is a woman who speaks fluent German, who's never going to be tripped up on any German culture or traditions, and has even been forced to have a double identity, a second identity, since she was knee-high. And Poland had been annexed out into 3 different nations for over 120 years when Zoe was born. But she would say that she sucked in patriotism with her mother's milk.
The patriotism would find its first satisfaction at the end of World War I, when Poland was restored to the map of Europe.
She saw her father, a big man, a veteran himself, with tears coursing down his cheeks because he could hear the Polish national anthem being played on the streets of his hometown in public.
Elzbieta came from a family of 7 siblings. She grew up watching her older brothers fulfill their patriotic duty in joining the Polish army, a path she desperately wanted to follow for herself. But for a woman at the time, that was an impossibility. And so she went to university to study mathematics instead.
While she was at university, she also managed to join this women's military voluntary organisation, the Women's Military Auxiliary.
It was in the Women's Military Auxiliary that a set of highly valuable skills would calcify around Elzbieta's patriotic core.
They knew how to drive military vehicles, the use of guns and explosives, all of that. She knew how to make petrol bombs. She knew about emergency military medicine.
But the experience gave her more than just discipline and military know-how. It gave her a community.
She made very close friendships, including 2 women, her dear friend Mariana Zawodzinska, who later also served in the war as a courier and then as a coder and transmitter, staying up at night to send messages through the airwaves. and the other one was a girl called Zofia.
Zofia was a talented and formidable Polish patriot. She had both a short fuse and a tremendous capacity for kindness. She was Elzbieta's first true compatriot in the Women's Military Auxiliary, but their friendship was destined to be short-lived.
Zofia, unfortunately, was killed just before the start of the Second World War in an appalling train accident, and Zoe always believed that this train crash was the result of German sabotage or German manipulations, because there were a lot of false flag operations going on across the border from Germany into Poland in an attempt to justify the German invasion.
And so, as the machinery of invasion arrived at Poland's doorstep once again, Elzbieta felt determined to protect her nation and avenge the death of her dear friend in any way that she could.
Zoe was shaken awake at 5 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of September by an explosion. And as she quickly leapt out of bed, she was staying at a Polish airbase, and she thought perhaps this was the Polish Air Force undertaking exercises that she just didn't have the memo for. But she flipped on the radio, actually, and they confirmed that Nazi Germany had invaded Poland. And the radio programme ended to all listeners saying, as of now, we are all soldiers, which is something obviously Zoe took to heart.
Zoe and the other women of the military auxiliary may have technically been volunteers, but in Poland's moment of crisis, they did not hesitate.
So she was quickly up and in uniform, and she had instructions to undertake in the event of an invasion. So she and her unit of women, she requisitioned a municipal bus, they all got on. They had instructions as to which roads to try and keep open and which ones to try and slow down any advancing enemy army. So as they drove out, they took certain routes and they threw broken glass and old nails and things out on the road behind them.
Within hours, the speed and brutality of Germany's invasion made itself known.
Very quickly, they are under attack. They have to leave that bus after a day, and eventually Zoe received orders that sent her on to Lvov.
Lvov would become a site of enormous strategic importance very quickly.
I think it's probably important to say that the first couple of weeks of the war, Poland actually put up a good defence, and it's often forgotten, I think. And it's only on the 17th of September, when the Red Army invaded from the east, that Poland, a country that never capitulated during the war, decided that they couldn't continue to fight on effectively on two fronts simultaneously. So they took the strategic decision to bring out the majority of their armed forces, which became known as the Polish Armed Forces Overseas. And the route they took was through Lvov, as it was, into Romania, and then they regrouped in France.
Elzbieta worked tirelessly during the siege of Lvov, pulling up paving stones for barricades, making petrol bombs in dingy basements, running munitions to the army's besieged anti-aircraft defences. In short, she did whatever she could.
And they actually managed to get out 35,000 troops. They got out the first Enigma code breakers, some of their great national treasures, the government, and Zoe was one of the people helping to keep that route open.
In the dwindling days of the siege, as armies closed in from both east and west, Elzbieta was faced with a choice.
She could have left with the Polish armed forces. Many of the women did. They continued to serve as drivers or as medics. But Zoe decided that she could most effectively serve her country by remaining inside Poland and helping to set up the fledgling Polish resistance.
By early October 1939, Poland has been divided into two territories, with the eastern part occupied by Soviet forces and the west taken by the Germans. And now Elzbieta, desperate to join the Polish resistance, finds herself stuck on the wrong side of a new border.
She's in eastern Poland, whereas she can be most useful in western Poland because that's where she's got all of her contacts.
Crossing the demarcation line means getting across the river Vistula. Heavily patrolled by forces on either side, this will be no mean feat.
It's incredibly dangerous, but she travels with another woman. They considered swimming across the river, but then they realised there were snipers on the banks on both sides taking pot shots at any heads bobbing up, so they gave that up. They tried to bribe someone to get them over, but he just took all their money and left. So in the end, Zoe just said, come with me, to her colleague, and brazened it out. They went across the one remaining bridge in that sector, and she just said, look, I'm German. I've just caught in the wrong zone. Let me get over. And she looked at them, speaking fluent German, and the guards just let her across.
It's a first taste of how her much begrudged, split personality upbringing may serve her yet in the days of German occupation. Before she knows it, Elzbieta is homeward bound.
The streets are absolutely crowded with people, refugees from both places, trying to get to where the rest of their families are, trying to save what they can of their possessions. It's absolute chaos. There's bomb damage, of course, everywhere. But she manages to hitch rides and eventually goes to stay with her friend Mariana, who was still in Western Poland. And Mariana has already joined the fledgling Polish resistance.
Mariana quickly delivers her friend to the engine room of this nascent army. A freezing, unheated kitchen in a drab apartment block in Warsaw.
She goes to this kitchen where she's met by a very nondescript woman who is quite senior in the fledgling resistance and swears her oath of allegiance, and then immediately volunteers to set up an intelligence gathering network across Silesia, where she has many pre-war contacts.
Silesia is a relatively small region, about as big as New Jersey. But its position, sharing a border with Germany, means it's of critical strategic importance.
Both the Polish resistance, but also Britain as well, are desperate to find out how Nazi Germany is organising inside the first occupied country, Poland. So there is urgent need for this information. So she recruits, within a week, she'd got 50 people who she used to work alongside or she knew from before the war. At the end of the month, she's got 200 people.
Elzbieta dubs her network Coal. She organises her recruits into tight cells of 5 so that one compromised agent won't bring down the whole operation. The cohorts share only one trait in common. They are all women.
I think it's because women had this superpower in the 1940s. Arguably, we still do to some extent, I would say, which is that they tended to be overlooked and underestimated. And certainly by the Nazi German forces, which are incredibly male chauvinistic society and values. They just couldn't believe that women would have the nous and the nerve to undertake such work. So Zoe recruited women, for example, who worked as secretaries, translators, or even just office cleaners in the occupying authorities' offices, and they could see where the pins are going on the maps on the wall and look at the papers on the tables, overhear the conversations. The women who worked in the telephone exchange or the post office, who could steam open letters and again do some eavesdropping. But even women who worked in bakeries or laundrettes, they could note the change in garrison bread orders. And if you do this across a region the size of Silesia, you can see where troops are going to be sent, or, which uniforms are coming in to be washed and mended. Well, that will tell you again about military intent across a large region.
All of this is critical information, but it's meaningless unless it finds its way into the right hands. Intelligence reports will need to be delivered to the resistance headquarters in Warsaw.
At this point, moving intelligence around like that was one of the most dangerous roles in the resistance. So, of course, Zoe immediately put her hand up and offered to do it herself. So every week she would crunch all of this information from her contacts into a single report. And then she would just keep as much of it as she could in her head, because obviously that can't be found. But she's looking at changing statistics every week. So she needs a little aide memoir. She had a little slip of paper that she would write an aide memoir on. And she would hide it in various places to smuggle it over the trains to Warsaw. She had a clothes brush, and the back of this wooden clothes brush would slide off. And she could put this slip of paper in where the bristles are fixed and then slide the back on and transport her information that way.
But even the most ingenious of hiding places can only protect you so much.
Sometimes the Germans did capture the couriers, men and women. And when they discovered what these women were doing, the results were invariably very brutal.
Elzbieta would come to understand early on just how much of a risk she was taking.
So quite early on in the war, she was travelling on what were called fingers. These were paper identity documents that didn't have a photograph on them. They just had fingerprints on, and she's travelling on stolen fingers, somebody else's papers, because she doesn't want her identity to be known. She goes to Warsaw, she manages to deliver her information, and on this occasion she was given a chunk of money, like a wodge of notes, banknotes, to take back to help finance her resistance network, because of course she needs to pay the women something, but also she needs to pay bribes, she needs to pay for some weapons and so on.
Elzbieta shoves the notes into the bottom of her bag and boards a train home.
And unfortunately, it's just one of those occasions where the Germans are going down carriage to carriage and not just checking travel and identity documents, but going through people's bags, going through their pockets. So she thinks, oh, what am I going to do?
If the Germans discover her carrying so much money, they will inevitably ask questions. She knows her stolen papers won't stand up to any scrutiny. Elzbieta feels the blood rushing to her face.
She grabs her bag, she walks down the corridor of the train and goes to the toilet cubicle, manages to pull back a bit of the vent. She ties some string around this wodge of banknotes, shoves it as far down away as she can, just leaving a little bit of string so she knows how to collect it later, pushes the vent back and goes and sits down. But now she is looking rather flustered and bright red.
When the Germans search Elzbieta's belongings, they find nothing out of the ordinary.
But they can tell that she looks nervous, so they just pick her as one of the people to come off the train for further checks at the next station stop. Now, she's one of quite a few people taken off the train at this point. All polls, they're all lined up. And she knows she's travelling on stolen papers. Her fingerprint isn't going to match the one on the document. So she's thinking, again, what can I do?
Elzbieta joins the very back of the queue. Perhaps she can make a run for the tree line. But then again,
they're not going to think twice about shooting her down, so that's not a great option. And the queue is going down, people are taking their turns. But on the train, there are a number of Germans who are travelling who are also getting irritated. They are impatient, they want to get going with their journeys. So there's a bit of pressure on the German guards as well. Eventually, Zoe's the last one, she comes up, they put her finger on an ink pad and she has to put it on a piece of paper. But she just puts her finger on the ink pad, lifts it up again. She waits while the German guards put everything away, fold up the ink pad, put it in the desk drawer, lock the drawer, and then they turn around, everyone get back on the train, but she still hasn't put her finger down.
Hurry up, they bark at her. There's a whole train waiting.
So she puts her finger down, and as she does so, she just takes the opportunity to just smudge it a little, just moves her finger. And they couldn't read the difference between the fingerprint on the note and the fingerprint she'd smudged, and they couldn't be bothered to get the ink pad out again. That moment of creative thinking, that saved her life. And that was just one of so many times when she's a hair's breadth from being caught.
Soon, the treacherous crossing of borders becomes routine.
She's been actually keeping count of how many times she's been crossing these temporary wartime borders. She keeps counting. When she gets to 100, she thinks, well, maybe it's going to be unlucky if I keep counting. So she stops counting, but she keeps going. And she's always asking, is there something more? This is not enough. I should be doing more.
Elzbieta appeals to the resistance for more responsibilities. She has already proven herself as a formidable courier.
But also she does speak fluent German. They think they can use these skills, and they put her on one of the most perilous routes at that point, which is bringing intelligence, now on microfilm, all the way from Warsaw into the heart of the Third Reich, into Berlin itself.
As counterintuitive as it may seem, Berlin represented one of the only dependable routes to get intelligence out of Poland and on to London.
After the fall of France in June 1940, the Polish government in exile and the surviving Polish forces, many of them, managed to make their way to Britain, and the government in exile sets up in London. And so they need to get this very time-sensitive military intelligence to Britain as quickly as possible. And the fastest way to do that is they have a friendly contact at an embassy, the Manchurian embassy in Berlin. If Zoe can take the intelligence to him, he can get the microfilm out in the diplomatic post. So that's the fastest way to do it.
The organisation in charge of this high-risk route is known as Farmstead. As she enters its ranks, she chooses a new codename in honour of the friend she has sworn to avenge.
And part of the reason that she took the name Zoe as her nom de guerre during the war is in honour and to pay tribute to the memory of this dear friend of hers from the Women's Military Auxiliary. Zofia became Zoe.
Zoe's new boss in Farmstead is a woman called Emilia Malessa.
And at first, Zoe's quite intimidated by Amelia, who is an incredibly stylish woman as well. We've got some great photographs of her looking like she's on a catwalk, really, but also incredibly good at insinuating her way into getting intelligence herself and at organising this land courier system. And so Zoe reports to her, and they end up becoming really best buddies, working in circumstances of extreme danger, looking out for each other. They are a fantastic team. Zoe becomes her number 2. And they together run this land courier system.
Soon enough, Zoe is regularly travelling into the eye of the storm.
Every time Zoe goes on one of these journeys, she is adopting a different persona. So she'll have a different name, different papers, travel documents with different photographs in. She'll change her hairstyle. She'll have glasses. Apparently she'd even do a different walk. She'd really inhabit these, we call them a legend, but your artificial identity. And what she quite often travelled under is the name Elizabeth Kubitzer, which is a German name. And she used to pose as a German oil company secretary.
Oil was considered an important wartime industry, and Zoe's forged credentials gave her carte blanche to travel back and forth to Berlin. It was a system that worked perfectly, until it didn't. We first met Zoe as she returned from one of her Berlin runs, dragging a suitcase lined with foreign currency. At her sister's apartment, she discovered that her coal network had been compromised. She spent a chaotic day sending out warning signals to those not yet caught and attempting to ditch a Gestapo tail before boarding an express train to Warsaw, only to discover that her shadow had followed her on board. In the middle of the night, she slipped off her shoes, walked through the train's carriages, heaved open a passenger door, and threw herself out.
She did cut her arms and legs up a bit, but she hadn't had her brains smacked out by a telegraph pole. She hadn't ended up under the heavy metal wheels of the carriages coming behind. And above all, she hadn't been caught or betrayed her colleagues. And one more time, out of so many, she walked away.
By the time Zoe arrives back to Warsaw, bruised, shaken but still alive, there are wanted posters with her name and picture on them. This spells the end of her viability as a courier.
She knows that she is burnt. She can't continue to work on those routes. But she's not a particularly modest woman. Something I also like about her, she knows she's got great skills of value to the resistance. But she is not expecting the absolute honour that is given to her, which is she is appointed as, I believe, the only female emissary, so personal representative, that is, of the commander of one of the armed forces for the Allies. So the commander-in-chief of the Polish Resistance Home Army, Stefan Grot-Rowecki, appoints her and says she take 2 very important microfilm. She's got to smuggle them over nearly 1,000 miles of enemy-occupied territory to get them to the Polish government in exile in London.
Once Zoe arrives in London, she is to undertake 2 missions on Rowecki's behalf.
The first is to sort out the London end of the land courier route. So the system works pretty well from the Polish end. She and Emilia Malessa have got a lot of security protocols in place. They're very cautious. But at the London end, there seems to be lots of delays. It's very problematic.
The other is a mission that Zoe will happily die trying to fulfill.
The second one is to secure the legal military status of women serving in the Polish Home Army. Because at this point, the women do not have military status. They are seen as volunteers, even if they're doing exactly the same work. I mean, they start off mainly as messengers and medics, but they quickly take on roles. They become highly trained as saboteurs. They are trained in the use of weapons. There are even female assassin squads. But the women are different because they are volunteers. So they don't get invited to military briefings, which is problematic. They don't have rank. So they can't discipline men, theoretically, serving subordinate to them, which leads to all sorts of security breaches and just basic inefficiency. And above all, they don't have any protections under the Geneva Convention, which has outlined protections for prisoners of war.
The voluntary status of women in the Home Army means there has always been an added risk for couriers like Zoe.
If the Germans catch the women, they're considered basically commandos under Hitler's commander order, which means they are either shot immediately or they are interrogated and then shot, or they may be sent to a camp to be laboured to death, but they do not survive, whereas the men are getting placed in prisoner of war camps.
It's with the promise of righting that wrong that Zoe accepts the most audacious mission of her career so far.
In 1943, Zoe leaves Warsaw. Ironically, the first place she has to go to is Berlin because it's the fastest route. But that is, of course, the journey on which they have got pictures of her up, seeking her arrest.
Trusting her safety to one of the disguises she has carefully constructed, she prepares for a route that will entail crossing 6 border controls.
And she goes to Berlin with immense difficulty. She gets out from there, she manages to change trains, she gets to Strasbourg, and she's nearly caught in an Allied bombing raid in Strasbourg, but she makes it across the border and gets into northern France.
But it's in occupied Paris where Zoe's journey really begins.
She has to go from northern France into so-called Free France, which we would call Vichy France.
Zoe is told that her best chance is to stow away on a train bound for the south.
But this one, she decides to hide in the big steel water tender, you know, the tank that takes the water to make the steam for the steam train. And she thinks no one will have thought of that. So she climbs in the middle of the night into the water tender with a bit of help from the French resistance and actually finds 7 members of the French resistance already hiding in the tank.
The hiding place makes perfect sense, until the train stops to take on more water.
They're all nearly drowned halfway on their journey, but they do make it. She gets into Vichy France. Eventually she makes it to southern France near the borders with the Pyrenees.
From here, Zoe has been told that her best bet is to cross the border into Spain on foot.
She's got some money and she's paid for a guide to take her over the mountains. They have got a rendezvous in a mountainside inn one evening. So she turns up for this rendezvous and she hasn't got boots, she hasn't got climbing shoes or any good kit. She's just got her skirt and she's bound cloth around her legs and her ankles.
As she opens the door to the mountain inn, Zoe is surprised to come face to face with the same group of resistance soldiers she had met in the train's water tank. Evidently, they plan on crossing the Pyrenees the same way she does.
And then these Frenchmen recognise her and they're like, oh, hi, come on. So she's looking at them and just at that point, a German border guard comes in for a beer.
Suddenly, silence descends on the room. The border guard takes in the scene before him.
And he sees these young men of conscription age, not in uniform, and immediately goes and starts questioning them. So she just backs away.
Zoe is dressed for the hike ahead. One glance at her will reveal that she too is planning to cross the border.
She pulls off her hat and her scarf and her gloves and puts them in an armoire in the hallway. And in that armoire she found a white serviette, a napkin, which she puts over her arm. And even though she's still sort of dressed for a mountain trek, they don't really look at this woman with a napkin on her arm looking like a waitress. And she just kind of goes past them and up the stairs, the fastest way out of that situation. She gets to the top of the stairs and someone runs at her and basically throws her out of a high window.
Zoe lands with a thud in a bank of snow. Thrown, it turns out, by the guide hired to protect her. As the French resistance soldiers are arrested, Zoe lies shivering in her hiding place, until eventually the coast is clear. Still, her ordeal is far from over.
Eventually the guide does take her across the mountains, and that's an incredible epic 3 attempts, and they are shot at by German patrols in the mountains. But she makes it into Spain, and eventually she hitches a ride on a troop ship from Gibraltar, and she arrives in Liverpool on May Day 1943.
Instead of a hero's welcome, Zoe is interrogated by the British Secret Services. Not that they can get much out of her. She hasn't travelled for the best part of 2 months to give up her information to the first stranger who asks her for it. Instead, she insists on being brought directly to London, where the Polish government in exile resides.
She reports to the Poles, who are astounded by the information she's got on these microfilms. The first one is full of very high-grade military information. The second one is, it's not the first information on the Holocaust, but it's important, still fairly early information on Nazi German Holocaust plans, including information, of course, on Auschwitz, which is inside occupied Polish territory.
With her precious cargo safely delivered, Zoe can turn to her two missions. Firstly, there's the problem of miscommunication along courier routes.
The man running the British end of the land routes, the courier system, is a man called Kazimierz Bilski. His nom de guerre is rum. He was quite fond of rum. He's very much a man of his times. He doesn't really know right from the start how to respond to Zoe. He doesn't know if he should salute her or if he should bow and kiss her hand in traditional chivalrous Polish manner. But very soon she's giving him orders and telling him how to sort things out, and he just calls her a captain in a skirt, and memos about her in the British archives say, she's a military female dictator.
A reputation that Zoe is all too happy to live up to, if that's what it takes to get her job done.
They do eventually work things out and they improve the land courier route. And then she moves on to mission number 2, which is to secure the legal recognition for women. And nobody in Britain takes it seriously. She said it was the hardest part of her war, trying to get these orders pushed through. And eventually she is forced to draft the decree herself that will give women legal military status. But at that point, nobody is going to sign it.
Because in the time that it has taken Zoe to arrive in London, Rawecki, the commander who has given Zoe her orders, has been captured and executed by the Germans. With the absence of his backing, Zoe realises there is little more she can do in Britain.
The British thank her very much for her service and say, would you like a room in London or in Scotland where most of the Polish forces are? And she's, what are you talking about? I need to get back and serve my nation. And they said, well, that's very honourable, but unfortunately you can't return because there's only one way to get back, and that's to parachute. And obviously you're a lady.
Having spent some time in the company of Agent Zoe, I imagine you'll be able to guess her response.
So at this point, she becomes the only female member of the elite Polish special forces, which are known as the Cichociemni, which means the silent unseen. They are the cream of the Polish forces who have made it back, the 35,000 troops who got out of Poland at the start of the war. And they cream off around 2,000, and about 316 will eventually parachute back to Poland, but also behind enemy lines in France and other countries as well.
For Zoe to join the ranks of the silent unseen, she will need to undergo intensive training. She'll also have to conquer her biggest fear.
She's terrified of heights. That's one of her real vulnerable areas. And yet here she is. She has to learn to parachute. And they do parachute training partly up in Scotland. They have to leap from the roof of a building, then from a big metal tower. Looks a bit like a telegraph tower. And then they have to leap from a 4-engine British Halifax bomber. Absolutely terrifying. And she would land badly because she was so scared. She twisted her ankles, but she just had them bound up and then insisted on doing it again, so that eventually she passed the course.
Finally, one night in late September 1943, Zoe is cleared to return to her homeland.
And she was the first of the 3 special forces, Cichociemni, to jump from her Halifax bomber to a field not that far outside Warsaw, where they were met by members of the Polish resistance who had been radioed ahead to be there to receive them.
As Zoe came thudding down to earth, swaddled in the parachute that had broken her fall, a member of the resistance rushed towards her to help her to her feet.
And then he jumped back, apparently, going, "Oh my God, it's a woman." And she said, "It's not a woman, it's a soldier."
In the months since Zoe left Warsaw, occupied Poland has become a tinderbox of resistance.
When we think about resistance in the Second World War, we tend to think about France, and obviously the situation there was appalling, and the courage of the French resistance, women among them, was absolutely extraordinary. But conditions are almost completely different. It's another level of horror in Eastern Europe. The Nazi Germans considered the Polish people to be Slavic, so to some degree not fully human.
That appalling racism has left its brutal mark on the people of Poland.
When Zoe went through France, in Paris in particular, she was amazed to see German officers politely greeting people on the street, doing tourism with Baedeker guidebooks in their hands. In Poland, if you don't get off the street, you're shot. It was incredibly brutal. So there is not enough food. There is not enough supplies. There is danger everywhere.
And so, by late 1943, the Polish are desperate to rise up and overthrow their oppressors.
But they are holding on until the Allies re-invade Europe. The liberation of D-Day they're waiting for, so that they know there'll be Allied troops on continental Europe before they rise up to shake off their Nazi occupying forces.
That's why Zoe has rushed back to Poland. She wants to be part of the fight. Her first stop on her return is to seek out her oldest friend, Mariana.
Mariana has been travelling, moving information around on drafty trains at night time. A lot of these trains are going incredibly slowly, crawling along, making way for troop trains to go past at every point. The broken windows and the freezing of winter. And she has caught some respiratory disease, and eventually she can no longer continue serving that way. So she is working, sending wireless signals at night and doing coding work. And when Zoe goes to meet her, it becomes very obvious that Mariana, her dearest friend, is dying.
On the evening of November the 11th, Polish Independence Day, Mariana died in hospital. Of the 3 plucky young women who had joined the Women's Military Auxiliary in the golden years before the war, only Zoe now remained. And so she would be heading into the final act of the war with both of their memories to fight for.
When Zoe returns, she tries to pick up her old role in the land courier system, working with Amelia at Farmstead. And she'd met before she left this red-haired man. We never actually get his real name. He had a couple of different code names that he operated under, who had joined the resistance, and she had thought there was something suspicious about him.
An intuition that would prove correct.
Soon after she arrives back in Warsaw, there is a terrible betrayal. It's a catastrophe. It's not a leak, it's a flood. About 50 women from their circuit are all rounded up and arrested, and they have been betrayed by this man. Because of the rigorous paperwork that was kept from various sources, we are able to trace the fate of a number of these women who had served. Some of them do survive, but a lot of them come to terrible ends.
The Gestapo have detonated a bomb at the centre of the Farmstead operation. And yet they know they still don't have everyone.
It seems that the Germans know they're searching for someone else. They do street roundups, and they're specifically looking for 2 women of Zoe and Amelia's ages and descriptions. Of course, it's the most appalling timing, because they are now coordinating in the run-up to the national uprising, what will become the Warsaw Uprising, and they need all hands on deck at this point.
In the interest of protecting what remains of the operation, Zoe and Amelia are ordered to split up. Amelia will run Farmstead from Warsaw, and Zoe will lie low at a convent in the countryside, ready to step in should Amelia be arrested. And yet, of all the orders that Zoe receives in her career, it is this one that proves too much for her to obey.
She refused to remain in hiding at the convent when she heard that the uprising was about to go ahead. And so she manages to make her way from that convent through the countryside back to Warsaw, and arrives just in time to take part in the Warsaw Uprising.
After travelling the breadth of Europe and back again in service of the resistance, there is simply no way that Agent Zoe is going to miss out on the moment of fruition. The Warsaw Uprising is everything she has worked towards.
The Warsaw Uprising is meticulously planned, actually. Militarily, it's an uprising against the Nazi German occupation. They know they can't liberate their entire nation, but they can liberate their capital city. So they've waited until the 1st of August, because D-Day has happened in June, of course, and the Allies are pushing through, and the West pushing the Germans back towards Germany.
But politically, the uprising is also engineered to anticipate the arrival of Soviet troops from the east.
In June 1941, Operation Barbarossa, Hitler had invaded Soviet-held wartime territory. So he had betrayed his former ally Stalin, prompting Stalin to change sides in the war in June 1941, and that's when the Soviet Union joined the Allies. So the Poles are in this very awkward position of having to be allies in the war with the Soviet Union that had actually started the war by invading and occupying and annexing off their territory.
Now that the tides are turning against the Germans, the Polish government in exile is already beginning to consider the fate of the nation, beyond the end of warfare.
So the Poles are very keen not only to push the Germans out, but to liberate their capital city before the Red Army arrive so that they can welcome them as equals and allies rather than to be beholden to them for the liberation of Poland.
And so, on August the 1st, 1944, they set their plan into motion.
By this point, the Germans are losing badly. They're losing on the Eastern Front. Instead of arriving in their very swish, well-designed uniforms, they're now coming back maimed, injured, drunk, exhausted, starving from the Eastern Front. Their morale has gone to an all-time low. So the Poles think they'll be able to get rid of them in perhaps 2 days, but they are prepared to hold out for 2 weeks.
For the first time since the siege of Lvov at the outset of the war, Zoe is thrust back into the heart of the battle.
Zoe's role was actually to coordinate the supplies to the fighting front lines, not so much of military supplies, but whatever was needed, but of medical supplies and food and water, because quite soon the water is shut off. So they have a well drilling venture and so on. She's actually quite frustrated not to have been given a gun and sent right out into the front line, but almost immediately the whole of Warsaw is under attack and everywhere is essentially the front line. So she serves there not for 2 days, not for 2 weeks, but they have to fight on for actually 2 months. They held out.
The reason for that tortuous extension? A simple, if brutal, matter of politics.
When the Red Army is within sights of Warsaw, Stalin demands that they, instead of going in to support their now allies, the Poles, they set up camp on the eastern outskirts of the city. And climbing the last remaining tower blocks, the Poles can actually see these camps. They can see that they are that they are just waiting for the Poles and the Germans to fight it out, because it didn't really help Stalin's long-term plans to end up with a strong Polish resistance.
Stalin even went so far as to forbid desperately needed British supply planes from refueling on Soviet territory after they had made their drops. In effect, the Polish resistance was left to fight it out on their own, and Zoe was at the heart of the besieged operation.
She was serving right in the thick of it. They had to keep moving where their head office was, where they had their supplies hidden. They had supplies in various caches around the city, most famously under the stage of the main theatre in Warsaw, but in various other places, the university and elsewhere as well. But they had to keep moving depending where they were. And, some of the women that I interviewed as well, one of them was involved in getting out of the old town when that sector of the city fell to the Nazis. The fighting men and the civilians escaped through the sewers underneath the city. They also took out their wounded, including enemy wounded, who they were tending to. They took them on stretchers as well. It was this incredible humanitarian as well operation. And Zoe was one of the people in the streets that were still held by the Polish resistance, helping to haul these men out, covered in filth.
Despite the brave actions of Zoe and all of the people who gave everything to the Warsaw Uprising, without help from the Soviets, the operation could only hold out for so long.
Hitler said, just kill the soldiers, kill all the men, kill the women, kill the children, kill them all. And there was complete wipeouts in certain sectors of the city, but they kept fighting until October 1944, when finally the commander of the Warsaw Uprising, of the Home Army at that point, Komorowski, had to sign the surrender.
It was a crushing blow for Zoe. And yet it was tempered by a victory that she had fought for with every fibre of her being.
Just before Komorowski surrendered, he wrote out who should receive which medals. I mean, obviously they didn't have physical medals to give people. They had slips of paper that could be hidden and records that were kept. And as he was doing this, Zoe petitioned that the women should also receive recognition. And it was at this point that he signed the decree that gave women legal status as soldiers.
12,000 women had served in the Warsaw Uprising. Now, thanks to the actions of Zoe, they would be spared the worst fate imaginable at the hands of the Germans.
And now, for the only time in the war, Germany set up a prisoner of war camp for women, female soldiers. In fact, there were so many, they had to set up 2 separate prisoner of war camps for women. And Hannah Charnotska, that woman that we opened this interview with, her life was saved, as were so many thousands of others, because of Zoe getting this decree pushed through.
It's a powerful legacy to have left in her wake. A fitting end to one part of this story. Though, of course, the war was far from over, and Zoe's role in it was not yet complete.
And of course, Zoe could have gone into that prisoner of war camp with her head held very high indeed. But she was actually given last orders by Bor Komorowski, and she kept serving right until the end of the war and after.
I wish I could tell you that the end of the war, when it finally came, meant the end of Zoe's tribulations. Perhaps that would be the case in the Hollywood version of her life. But reality seldom resembles the movies.
In the West, quite recently we celebrated VE Day and then VJ Day. We think of all those people dancing, doing the Congo, bunting, Churchill waving, the royal family, celebrating peace and freedom. But in Poland, of course, they're left just with peace. They are not left with freedom. They are left with a Soviet-imposed communist regime. And although Zoe was never arrested during the war, never caught, in 1952 she was arrested by the Polish communist government. And she was actually sentenced to prison for 10 years on trumped-up charges. And she was tortured brutally while she was in prison, but she never betrayed her wartime colleagues.
The story of Zoe's second act, as she fought not only for her own freedom, but for the recognition of the countless women who gave everything to the cause of the Polish resistance, is one that you will find beautifully told in Clare Mulley's book, Agent Zoe. In its own way, that tale is every bit as perilous as the one you've just heard. I wouldn't want to spoil it for you here, but you should know one thing about its ending.
The wonderful thing about, so many wonderful things about Zoe's story, but one of them is that you can't keep a good woman down. And it's such a story of victory and triumph and laughs at the end. It's absolutely brilliant because ultimately she won out and she secured freedom for her nation in the end as well.
Join us next time for another undercover escapade with True Spies. Disclaimer. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the subject. These stories are told from their perspective, and their authenticity should be assessed on a case-by-case basis. If you're enjoying this podcast, please click now to give it a 5-star rating or leave a review. Ratings and reviews help people discover the podcast and help us bring you more great stories. And if you have some time, why not forward the podcast to a friend?
I think with the Syria book, it had a lot to do with watching Syria just collapse into civil war and the misery that ensued among ordinary Syrians. That got hard for me to deal with toward the end of my time at the agency because it was so bloody. You're taught and expected to have some analytic distance from all this stuff, to look at it coolly and coldly, and that becomes hard when you're talking about individual people who were sucked up into this thing. And so writing Damascus Station was cathartic for me in that way, because I felt like I didn't have to write a book about what the Assad regime was going to do next or why the conflict was happening. I could just write stories about individual people who were experiencing it and how they experienced it, and that was very cathartic.
True Spies, the debrief from SPYSCAPE Studios. Search for True Spies wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey folks, get ready for a new season of Blowback coming Monday, September 22nd. This time around, we're covering the Cold War showdown in Africa.
When apartheid South Africa invades the newly independent nation of Angola, revolutionary Cuba sends its own army to defend its African ally, while the United States backs a warlord whose only goal is power.
Subscribe now at blowback.show and get the entire season when it drops, ad-free. Blowback.show.